Alia El-Yassir. She is the UN Women's Regional Director for Europe and Central Asia. Miss El-Yassir, thanks for being with us on the News Hour. Now, a broad question, but it's an unprecedented past 12 months. How have they been for women?
Well, first of all, happy International Women's Day. I mean, it's as you mentioned, it's an opportunity to celebrate achievements, but also look how much further we have to go. I think that the past 12 months have been hard on absolutely everyone around the world, but just to be realistic, it has been the impact of the COVID-19 crisis has been felt and will continue to be felt disproportionately by women. You mentioned the impact on economic activities. We know that women entrepreneurs have been hardest hit in the pandemic as they own some of these micro and small and medium enterprises that have been particularly hard hit. They work in those sectors that have been impacted by COVID-19. They are in the service sectors, in the tourism and hospitality sectors that have been impacted by COVID-19. So they are disproportionately affected. But because we also know that there are gender dimensions and inequalities that preceded the COVID-19 crisis. So these underlying conditions of inequality have been exacerbated by the COVID-19. And so we're seeing areas where we hoped to close the gaps, having those gaps widen. If I can mention in terms of poverty, there were aspirations that by this year, the poverty globally will drop by 3%. It has in fact increased by 9%, and that has translated to an additional 47 million women and girls who have gone under the poverty line, which is really devastating.
Absolutely, it's a huge challenge and further entrenched by, of course, the pandemic. So looking ahead, how do you try and redress the gap that was there before and also make up for the huge gap that's been generated by this past 12 months?
Well, I'd like to touch here on the theme for this year's International Women's Day, which is focusing on women's leadership to build a more equal world in the COVID-19 and the post-COVID-19 context. If we look at if we go to 2020, last year, if you think before the COVID-19 became a global pandemic, although women in leadership positions had doubled since the Beijing conference, the last world conference that happened on women in 1995, globally, we still reach only 25% representation of women in leadership positions. And this means that actually, for us to reach parity in parliaments, we're not going to do that before 2063. If we're looking at the level of ministerial cabinets, that's not going to happen before 2077. And if we have these really high aspirations of having parity at the head of state level, it's going to take us another 130 years. And if that was the situation before COVID-19 has hit, it's going to be even worse after we deal with this pandemic. And what is of concern is that although, as I mentioned earlier, we know that women have been disproportionately affected by the COVID-19 crisis, when we looked at the COVID-19 task forces around the world, we looked across many different countries, we see only 3.5% of those task forces have women represented on equal basis as men. And this is really worrying when we know that where we have seen women take on leadership roles, they have brought about really important and accelerated results for women and girls, as well as populations more generally. We've seen this in Tunisia, in Liberia, we've seen it all across the world, and yet the world is not responding adequately to putting women in those kinds of leadership positions where they can really give us the insights that are needed to make the situation much better for everyone and make sure that COVID-19 is not going to roll back on women's rights.
Absolutely. Lots of work to be done and incumbent on all of us to make sure that we stand up for gender equality. Alia El-Yassir, the UN Women's Regional Director for Europe and Central Asia, thanks for being with us and happy International Women's Day.